Okay, so let's get started. My name is Liz Wilson. I am with the OLLI program, and today we have Richard Leakey, who is a paleoanthropologist, politician, and environmentalist. He's participated in field expeditions from an early age with his parents, noted anthropologist Lewis and Mary Leakey. He's devoted to preservation of Kenya's wildlife and served as the director of the National Museums of Kenya, the Kenya Wildlife Service, and many other positions. Richard and his wife, Meave, are known for a significant discovery of Turkana Boy, which is a nearly complete 1.6 million year old skeleton of a juvenile Homo erectus. Richard has published a number of scientific and popular books, and he currently serves as the chair of the Turkana Basin Insititute in Kenya. Richard has received multiple awards and has over a dozen honorary doctorates from universities around the world. He is also a professor of anthropology here at Stony Brook University. So I'm happy to introduce Richard Leakey.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be with you all. I'm past active duty in terms of the lecture circuit, but I can still talk a little bit about a few things. And I understand that the main purpose today was to get my perspective as a Kenyan on climate change and what we know about it from the perspective of an African, which I am, the perspective of a conservationist, which I've been, and the perspective of somebody who's still active in a number of fields. And I'm a professor at Stony Brook, and I run a new organization called the Turkana Basin Institute, and we're just putting up a very large museum in Kenya, which is a huge enterprise called GARAN, which is looking at how climate change has basically driven the evolution of life from the beginning, many extinctions, many new species, and extinctions continuing to occur at a rather frightening pace. So let me talk a little bit about that. I think the first thing that I would like to start out with, some years ago, the president of Kenya asked me to take charge of the wildlife sector in Kenya, where there was massive poaching of elephant for the ivory and rhino for the horn. And we were losing between 4,000 and 6,000 elephants a year. Our population was, when I took over, standing at 15,000. And clearly the end was in sight for the Kenyan elephant. It wasn't only in Kenya this was happening, but it was happening across the board. And I was asked to stop it. Well, as it happened, I was successful with a team of excellent colleagues and friends and employees. And now the number of elephants that are being poached annually, I think last year was 17, and this year in Kenya, we were down to 9. 9 individuals, not 9,000. And so the elephant now is facing a future where there are going to be far more elephants than there's space for them, because the human population has grown enormously. And the land that the elephants used to go over outside the national parks is now land that's got people living in houses, and schools, and dispensaries, and clinics, farms. And so the elephant has to have a finite figure if it's to survive within the protected area. Now, a lot of my friends are still ardent about conservation and wanting to put up fences and wanting to stop all of the negatives that affect wildlife. But I think we have a much more central question. And the central question to me is, with climate change, what is the future of a national park? The national parks were created at a time rainfall was good, the surrounding human population was small, the rivers ran through the parks freely, there was very little encroachment from cattle and sheep and goats. And it was a sort of happy situation. And you could almost begin to think that this was a pristine environment. Well, with climate change, even in Kenya, the rivers are drying up. One park, when I set it up many years ago, had 27 permanent rivers. There is now one. And so the animals are really stressed. They're going outside the park. And the reason, one of the reasons the rivers aren't working is people are taking water before you go to the park. And I think climate change in terms of just water alone is phenomenal. Secondly, like you, we have warming. Our hot seasons are hotter. And so the risk of fire burning up the catchment areas of these forests is very severe. And I would predict in the next few years, we're going to see massive fires in the highland forests of Africa. And I think this is going to be devastating for the water regime. Thirdly, I think all of you are aware of COVID from one of your perspectives or another here in America, but COVID is a virus. And COVID crossed over from one species to another at a time when the original host was stressed, probably because of environmental pressure. It may not have been directly climate, but I think it was land use. And from the pangolin to the bat to the human was a fairly easy trip for this virus. Now, the situation in the environment in Africa and in South America, Southeast Asia, is continuing to get worse. And as it gets worse, more non-human species are going to be looking for other ways to live. And there's going to be more and more opportunity for viruses and other pathogens to jump from one species to another. And I would be very surprised if in the next decade we don't see something much worse than COVID start to fester and go around the world. And hopefully we can learn some lessons, although at times I wonder if we are easy to teach. But I think we've got to recognize that climate change is the fundamental factor affecting wildlife conservation. No matter what fence, electric or otherwise, no matter what water we put into the system, climate change, I think, is going to make many of the great parks of Africa empty of the big iconic species that you've all seen. And I'm frequently accused of being unduly pessimistic. Well, in 1992, I wrote a book called The Sixth Extinction. And in that, I predicted that by the year 2020, we would have lost between 50 and 75 billion species. The international agencies dealing with biodiversity, the UN and elsewhere, are now saying, actually, we've lost over 100 million species in that period of time when I predicted less than that. And I don't think I'm being pessimistic, but we've got to start recognizing that our future is bound up with climate change. I can't think of anything more threatening than climate change, and we all contribute to it, whether we think we do or not. And I just want to say, as a former conservationist, yes, I can stop you killing my elephants, and I can stop you poisoning the lions, I can stop you, ultimately, I think we can stop you selling pangolin scales and all the silly things we do. But you can't beat climate change unless we stop putting emissions into the air and we stop recognizing that we are one species. And I was in Holland a few days ago, and I gave a small speech at one of these internet programs to the Museum Naturalis, where they were talking about biodiversity, and there was a representative of IUCN. IUCN is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. I think it's an organization, a bag of hot air these days, because all they do is talk, nothing's happening. And I pointed out to them the fact that they hadn't yet included Homo sapiens on the endangered species list suggested that they were running amok. They don't know what they're doing. We are a very endangered species, and large parts of our population are more endangered than others. And the main factor that's driving the people of Central and South America to oblivion, and parts of Africa, parts of Asia, and I dare say parts of this country too, will be the climate. The fact that it gets too hot to live in, and then when it does stop being hot and we get massive torrential rain, any chance of restoring vegetation is pretty difficult. Most of the topsoil has gone off somewhere else. I also said to the Dutch a few days ago that they were showing pictures about how they're going to control the salinity of their inland seas, where they have more fancy dikes and computer-controlled management of the water system. And I pointed out that I was speaking at the university in Leiden, where you're already 10 feet below sea level. And I said, what happens when the temperature of the world goes up to 1.5 degrees Celsius? It is projected to happen in the next 30 years. And when the sea expands and comes up even 3 meters, let alone 5 meters in 50 years, their dikes will be archaeological underwater objects. Their port of Rotterdam will go. And I'm afraid here in this country, your port of New York will probably disappear, as will Boston and many others. You can't help it. I mean, the sea is a big body of water. And if you increase the temperature, you can model it on one of these computers. And you can see absolutely clearly that we're in for real trouble. And there's nowhere for the water to go except into the air. And if it goes into the air, the wretched stuff falls down in torrential rainfall. And so you have subways clogged, you have ports clogged. I mean, we've got to take climate change much more seriously. And there's no good sitting in America and say, we've got this man or this man leading us. The point is you, the person listening to this, has a role to play. And I'm sorry to lecture this way, but I do think that an awful lot of people in the world, particularly in the West, who live fairly well, but they waste a lot. And they don't see themselves in the same boat as the people living in Africa or the people living in Asia, who are desperately poor and who see these television programs and realize, why shouldn't they have one meal a day? Why should they stick to one meal every 3 days? Why shouldn't they have a phone? Why shouldn't they have a laptop? Why shouldn't they have a car? And, you know, I was being lectured recently about getting an electric car. And I'd love to have an electric car. The problem is my driver said to me, when on earth would you charge it? Because you live 80 miles out of the city and we have no electricity. So what are you going to do with an electric car? Except show it to your friends. So we have a lot of problems on our hands. And from the perspective of conservation and climate change, I just would beg you, remember you're part of a species that lives everywhere. Your plight, our plight is the same. And the only way we can fix this is to work together. And I see the tremendous efforts that are now being made to talk more about this in the international fora. And I find that enormously exciting. So moving on, because time's not on our side in these short talks, I spent much of my life looking at fossils that are now extinct. And what has become abundantly clear to everybody is that every non-domesticated creature on the planet today came about through a process you can call evolution, you can call it God's design. But the point is, each and every species that's ever been on this planet, plant, insect, aquatic or terrestrial, has had to live in an environment that was never stable. Maybe stable for 1 million years, it may be stable for 2. But sooner or later, something happens, a volcano erupts, or temperature gets cooler, and animals have to find a new way to live. And many can't and become extinct. And the main driving force, I would dare say, close to 600 million years has been climate change. And although 90% or more of the species that have lived have now gone, amongst the remaining 10%, the rate at which they're going warrants us being very worried. And it is climate, nothing else. It's not the hunters, it's not the meat eaters, although the meat eaters with methane are probably contributing something. But the extinction card is on the table, and we should be very careful. And I know that if we can all talk together, and if some of the suggestions that are being made now in your country can be carried forward to other countries, and we can find a way to get economic development that isn't destructive to the environment. And if we can finally shift away from gas and fuels of hydrocarbon origin, then I think we can do it. And I think the so-called green energy is catching on. I built my home 37 years ago, and there was no energy. And I had to put in a green system, solar and wind. And I've been asked to go back on the grid in Kenya. And I said, no, thanks. My system is reliable. It never breaks down. It works perfectly well. And I think going to solar and wind in the Northern Hemisphere is absolutely essential. And I think the US, although it's made a great fortune over the years through oil and gas, I think it's time to move on. And I think, amazingly, I saw today in the news releases that China has decided to give up coal. Well, if China has not only said, but actually gives up coal, my goodness, there's a challenge for us all, because coal is the enemy of humanity. And we've got to find a way to get around that, get around fuming cars, and move on with a new system. And it's not a journey to poverty. It's a journey to great wealth. And I think we just need to figure out that. And so my life based on paleontology is based on climate change creating new species. And amongst them was us. And the climate changed sufficiently that our oldest ancestors hadn't any chance of surviving unless they could walk on two legs. Once they got up and walked on two legs, their hands were free. Once they were free, they could carry things, pick up things, pick berries off trees, and more importantly, make stone artifacts. But once you start making a stone artifact, your brain has to figure which stone has an artifact in it and which stone will hit it without the stone you're hitting it with breaking first. And so there's a process of complex thought. And I think that led to a questioning mind that we have that wants answers for everything. We still want answers for everything. And I think it added to the need for complex speech. I think the other thing that is worth saying, my perspective from Kenya, is that we were heavily influenced by Christian missionaries. My own grandfather was one of the leading missionaries in Kenya in the late 1800s. And yes, he wanted to make people be more responsive, be more considerate, be more, quote, civilized. The thing is, I think he got that message from somewhere else, or his ancestors, because if you've only got two legs, and as some of you know, I lost my legs 25 years ago in a plane crash. And being legless, although I've got prosthetics, means that when you take your legs off, it's time to go to bed, time to have a shower, you can do nothing. And unless there's somebody around who's decent and say, do you need a hand, old boy? Yes, I do, actually. Could you pass a towel? Could you bring my legs back to me? You're done for. Now, 2 million years, 3 million years ago, when people started walking around with two legs, they must have periodically trodden on a thorn or been bitten in the ankle by a snake or twisted their ankle and been unable to keep up with everybody else. Well, in the African savannah, where A, it's hot, there are no supermarkets or stores nearby, you have to get the food that can be collected. And unless you had people with you, within 48 hours you'd be dead, because a lion or a hyena or a vulture would have gobbled you up. And so having two legs was the first ticket to feeling for others. And you've got to be able to receive kindness and give kindness, irrespective of the receiver or giver, is your girlfriend or your mother or your relative. But if you want to survive as a group, being together and working together was the solution 3-4 million years ago. And I hate to tell you all, but if we can't bring it all together again and work together, I think extinction is what I said to IUCN justifies putting us on the endangered species list. And so from Kenya, yeah, I mean, I appreciate you've got a very different country here. You do things in a very different way from my country and the continent I'm very much a part of. But you know, your current or recently current preoccupation with becoming more extremist, more white supremacist, more anti-African origin people, racist. These are very worrying trends in a civilized society. And then you put aside, listen, if you scratch my skin, it's the same as the fellow sitting next to you who came from Africa. I had an unfortunate mishap. I've had many mishaps, but the last big one was my liver failed. And liver is one of those organs you can't easily get in Kenya. It has to come from a living donor. And we don't have the medical facility. So my daughter put out an ad on Facebook, one of these things they use. And I was hospitalized here in Stony Brook. And one of my friends, a Kenyan African black man, flew over straight away and gave me 66% of his liver. They cut it out. He had a terrible time, but it's grown back. And as you can see on the picture, I'm very much better. I'm well. Liver's not the problem. I can still take a copious amount of, the bad things, but I'm very well indeed. So don't worry. But his liver comes from a man as dark as people they don't like in some parts of this country. But we're the same. We came from the same origin, the same genetics. We're one and all, one brother, one family, and that's the way we will survive. We will not survive if we go in these separate directions. No matter who's richer and who's poor, we have to come back. So a Kenyan perspective is let's do something more about getting back together again. So I don't know what is it now. No.
154.
154. So we still have half an hour. And I think the only other thing I really wanted to address very, very briefly was this question of, or in greater depth, the question of being one. I mean, they found in England what used to call the United Kingdom, can you imagine, Britain. And they had many years ago discovered a skull which wasn't very young, about 10,000 years old. It was the oldest fossil human they had yet recovered. And it was found in a gorge that I suppose very English, they called it Cheddar Gorge. So the Cheddar Man was actually the cheese came after it. But he was found in deposits. They could date him, they knew what he was with extinct mammals. And now in the latest decade, they've developed a technique to look at genetics and look at details of things like eye color and skin color. And Cheddar Man, and subsequently other investigations on other fossils of the same age, was as dark as they come from Kenya. He was not what I call pigmentally challenged individual. He was good, healthy melanin in his skin. And the Brits were a little bit, who's sure? And there are many of them. And the color that I have, and I'm sure many of you on this receiving end of this talk will have, is a color that is missing melanin, that's all. Because when our ancestors moved up to the temperate zones and were able to deal with cold climates and continuing lack of sunshine, I believe, the only way you get any conversion from sunlight through your skin to provide vitamin D was taking away some of the protective melanin that enabled us to do very well in the tropics. And so the dark skin and the light skin, we are the weak partner in this. And, we are pigmentally very challenged. And if some of you have been out to the West, and in the tropics, boy, on a hot summer's day, your skin is quick to remind you that this is not what we should be in. Give us that cream, give us that hat. And so our ancestors, whether you like it or not, were from Africa, and whether you like it or not, were dark. Now, I wouldn't use the word black any more than I would use a name white for me, because I'm not white. I shouldn't use anyone in this audience who's white. nor would I think there's anyone in this audience who's black. Some have more, some have less color. And white is a sheet of white paper. You can get it out of your dressing table. That's white. I know something like that. And black is black. It's like some of the cases, these computers come in. You don't get people like that. Even in the hottest parts of the world, they're not like that. It's too dark because they too then cannot absorb some of the environmental benefits that sunshine gives. So when you hear people calling he's a black American or he's a white American, it's nonsense. He can't be white or black. He's an American. He's dark than me. He has ancestors who are probably more recent in Africa than mine. But mine. And let's get on with it. Let's move forward and stop being separatists. And the last comment I'm going to make on the word separatist, I had a little moment yesterday when I went out of it.
You don't have to.
Was having some of these skin lesions removed because I've been in the sun too much. And a big sign saying, don't forget to keep your social distance. And I thought, that's a funny expression because it's not who my friends are, it's how close I get to them. So why don't we say physical distance? What social distance? You keep a social distance from people you don't want to mix with socially because they're poor, they're dirty, they're the wrong religion, wrong tribe. That's social distancing. But I don't think the government of America wants you to social distance, wants you to physically distance. But those words, social distancing, is so negative, it's so pejorative. And I have no wish to social distance from anybody. But I sure as hell want to keep a physical distance from people who might give me a disease I don't want to have. And so I think, we use words, black, white, social as opposed to physical, that basically are driving us further apart. And I would hope that some of you listening to me would take it from me. We say in Kenya, mzee, getting old, getting more cantankerous, but getting more concerned about the future because so much of what we're doing is going in the wrong direction, whether it's climate, or whether it's belief in systems. It's just based on lack of information, lack of awareness, lack of being able to talk about it. And that's what's driving us apart. And it shouldn't. We're one place we started, and I'm afraid one place we're going to go to, unless you guys get the technology to leave us. But anyway, not yet. So I think I'll take some questions, Liz, if that's all right.
Yeah. I just have a comment in the chat. Not to minimize progress, China continues to build coal plants inside their own country. Just a comment someone made.
Doing what?
It was a comment someone made. Not to minimize progress, China continues to build coal plants inside their own country.
Well, I think, as somebody said, that they're doing anything about coal is, to me, extraordinary. If they're doing enough, which of us ever does enough? But it's a start. And I think it could start a chain reaction in other countries. And I think they have stopped, but I think they have to go a whole lot further. But I think if we don't lecture them about it, but encourage them, I think we go further. They're part of the world, and whether they will do what they want to do, but they're more likely to do it. We don't hold a big stick on their head. And I just think sometimes when somebody does something that is positive, let's acknowledge it. It doesn't mean you can't do anything else that's positive. It doesn't mean you have to stop there. But well done, China. But come on, can't you go further than that? We need more. And I think that's the message I would give them anyway, but that's my personal view.
So does anyone have any questions? We'll take them now.
What do you think? Say that. I can't hear you.
I'm asking if anyone has questions because I don't see any in the chat. So if anybody would like to ask a question, unmute yourself. John? John Gobler, do you have a question?
Not, sorry.
Okay. Let's see if there's anybody raise their hand. Mary Negra, go
Yes.
ahead.
Yes, I'm interested in the
relationship of population control to the concern about climate change. Do you feel that the world is doing what it should to address
No,
the?
I think population control is totally out of control. We have, as I said in a talk a few days ago, the carrying capacity of the planet has been hugely exceeded by our species. Now, that's a tough one to dictate from afar. But in my country, where we had one of the highest population growth rates in the world, running 7–8%, 30–40 years ago, it's now down to just under 2.5. And it had nothing to do with persuading people that some religious sects were right or wrong. It had nothing to do with AIDS. It had to do with the fact that to put your children into school, you almost certainly guarantee a better future for them as well as for yourself. If you put them into school that costs school fees, that's hard for a lot of people who haven't got a steady income. If you put them into school and you have more than 2 or 3, you can't afford it. And if you don't put them in school, they don't get a job. So I think economics has a massive amount to do with it. And I think in Kenya, at any rate, the wage earners are saying, whoa, no, we can't have 7 children like our father did or mothers did. 2's enough. And we give them good education. We expect them then to get treatment at local hospitals and clinics that get measles vaccines and things like that. They have to pay for it. But the economics are playing the biggest role in Kenya. And I think until we can reduce the human population, we're still in trouble in terms of climate change because we're taking out more than we're putting back. And it's, as you know, I'm not a religious, well, you don't know, but I'm not a religious man. And I've had huge fights with a number of churches and said, look, stop guaranteeing these people become so poor that they come to you for help. That's not a way to win a friend or a soul. Let's be realistic. Everybody has to eat. Everybody has to have medicine. Everybody should have clothes on their back. And at the moment, there are too many people for the resources, even if we wanted to, there aren't the resources. And if we created the resources, my goodness, climate change would accelerate at an unacceptable speed.
Okay, so we have another question. What can individuals do to control climate change?
Say that again?
What can individuals do to control climate change?
Okay.
What can individuals do to control
Well,
climate
I think
change?
control, no, but I think you can mitigate against it getting worse on an individual basis by not using too much power, by trying to get alternative energy into your transportation, trying to get alternative energy into your homes. And I know in the temperate zones it's difficult. Try not to waste, because every piece of food you throw away has cost calories somewhere. And this is one of the few countries I know, and it probably I haven't been to look recently, but you used to go to cafeteria in universities and schools, and you watch the students come in with a tray. You think, good gracious, are they really going to eat that? And you hang around in your seat until they bring the tray back. And no, they haven't eaten it at all. They've eaten some of it, picked this, picked that. And where does the rest go? In the dump. Well, that's energy you're throwing away. And energy costs something somewhere to the world. And I think wasting water, although sometimes I'm sure you wouldn't want to believe that, but the water of the world is in short supply, and we'll never get more unless it gets really too hot to live, in which case it'll be more than we want from the rain. And I think generally, I think the best message each of us can do is if you can bring yourself to believe some of the things I've said, tell people about it, because most people simply aren't being told by people they respect. And they don't have to respect me, but if you, whoever you are, were persuaded by some of the arguments you're hearing, tell them about it and say, look, we can make a difference. We can do this. We shouldn't do that. You know, it's a snowball. And I think the individuals can play a much bigger part in this than we currently think. You're not helpless at all.
Thank you. So someone asks, will electric cars help the climate change?
What's that?
Will electric cars help with climate
Yes,
change?
enormously. I think electric cars will help because it cuts out the carbon emissions, which is the main factor at the moment for global warming. I think electric cars have inevitably got problems unseen, like nuclear. And nuclear is a wonderful source of power. What on earth do you do with the waste? And with electric cars, what do we do with these enormous batteries? And where do you ultimately put them? So I think we haven't got a full circle yet in the solution. But I do think if we can reduce the carbon emission, I think it's carbon dioxide is our biggest enemy at the moment. And the climate, the global warming is going to reach 1.5 in the next 10, 15 years, unless we're very clever. And that's too hot a planet, much too hot a planet. Because not only is it hot in California and Oregon, but the ocean's getting hot. And when the ocean gets hot, we reach what they're calling a tipping point. And some scientists say we're there now, I'm not sure. But with a tipping point, ocean currents change direction. And oceans that didn't bring moisture ashore will start to do so. And much of the moisture is going up and then comes bang down on your head as torrential rain. And I think the global warming in terms of land is one thing. And yeah, we can get solar powered air conditioning, but that's just in America. But in terms of the ocean and the fisheries and the fishery chain, it's a mess. And you know, if Greenland and the Arctic just become puddles of water, where's that water going to go? Take your coffee mug and see how much more you can get in when it's full. It spills over, and that spilling over is onto the land. So I think it's a real issue. And I know that we're accused as scientists of having overstated the case or over-egged the meal, but no, I think it's very real. And the reason I say it's real, and I assure you, I've looked at the fossil record going back throughout the history of humankind, which is 5 million years, 6 million. And every time there's been climate change of this magnitude, we know what happens. Sea levels go up, lake levels go up, rivers flood, ice caps melt, ice ages disappear. And it's not that this is the first time. This is not maybe. No, we've seen it. Turn the page. You've seen it happen before. Turn the page 2 pages back. You've seen it happen before. So this is not something we're guessing at. This is something that is absolutely fundamentally true from the record.
Okay, so Yvonne asks about atomic energy. What about atomic energy as we transition to green energy?
Well, I personally, I'm old enough now to take a risk. I'm going to tell you, I think nuclear energy, atomic energy is good. And if you look at the deaths from power stations associated with deriving that energy, they're pretty minimal compared to even coal and water. The point is, the fusion rods finally give up their ability to help you, have to go somewhere. And they're radioactive. And where do you deal with your atomic waste? That's the problem. And there have been wonderful ideas about drilling deep holes and sending them into space, but we've got to find another solution to that. And I think the issue with atomic energy is it's clean, it's remarkably safe in my opinion, but we don't know what to do with the waste products. And we don't know what to do with waste products of coal and petroleum. Yet we put them in the air. And we don't want atomic waste in the air. So we have to find another solution to that. And I'm not a nuclear specialist at all, but I think nuclear power, if it's managed safely so that you don't get meltdowns and explosions, and if it can be managed in a way that the waste can be ultimately disposed of by an international body with no political interference, yes, I think we'll buy a lot of time with it.
Okay. In the US, we have a boundless thirst for wealth and pursuit of material goods, and that is damaging the natural environment. What have you learned living in Kenya about wealth and happiness?
In the US, we're bound by wealth and goods,
Material wealth.
material wealth.
Wealth, yeah. What have you learned living in Kenya about wealth and happiness?
What have you learned living in Kenya about wealth and happiness?
Well, until very recently, most 90%, 95% of the population were being on a subsistence economy, growing what they eat and living where they grow it. And wealth was not an issue. Happiness, I think, was taken for granted. People there may be poor in terms of the coin, but very rich in spirit, very rich in heart. We now have 30%, 40%, maybe even 50% of our people live in towns or cities with electricity and with the inevitable bills that you have to pay, loans and debts. And the happiness is not increasing. The short-term happiness is fun, but as you all know in this country, wealth is a very hard thing to grasp for long. It slips through your fingers. And I think like any urban community, Kenyan urbans are seeing the same thing. Children grow big, they want another house, they want more TV, they want more this. And we're becoming very like you in many ways in that regard. And are we happier? Absolutely not, no. And I don't believe that happiness can be got through a television program. I don't think happiness can be got through looking at your bank statement. I think happiness comes from talking to each other, enjoying each other, enjoying fellowship, enjoying the beauty of nature. We still have that. We're not an unhappy country. Our suicide rate is creeping up, but it's creeping up in the under 30s because of the despair they get from seeing the state of play in the world, or because they get ideas, or they get morbid. I don't know what it is. I mean, it's a very unfortunate trend that I think hasn't really been registered as a public health crisis, but I think it's coming. And happiness, as you know, is I'm one of those very, very lucky people. I've always been happy. I don't know what unhappy means for more than about 2 minutes. And then I send it packing. There's no time to be unhappy now.
Okay, Jermaine asks, what are your thoughts on the CO2 capture facility that Iceland has started?
What are your thoughts on the CO2
Capture facility
that
that
Iceland
Iceland
has
started?
Well, I only read a little bit about it, to be honest with you. But I think anything that can capture CO2 and take some of it out of the air, I'm all for it. Because that, as I said from the beginning, it's CO2 is our enemy. If we can control that and keep the temperatures from getting too high, a lot of the other problems we have, we'll find solutions to. But if the sea gets too warm and we have too much heat in the sea and on the land, which will come from CO2, I don't know. I mean, I would love to see some of these space agencies put up an umbrella. Sometimes we put an umbrella to keep us cooler. And then we get cooler anyway, we'll get very cold. So I don't know what they're doing, but we have to find a way to stop climate change at this level.
Should we be reprocessing spent nuclear fuel?
Say that again, Liz?
Reprocessing nuclear fuel.
Should we be reprocessing spent nuclear fuel?
Well, I hope we can. Again, you know, I told you earlier, I'm a mosaic old man and don't know much about it, but I have friends in the nuclear industry and nuclear scientists. And I don't think it's out of reach. And I think anything we can reprocess safely that can control emissions of the raised temperatures of the planet are the key way forward. It's the key to saving elephants. It's the key to saving plankton. It has to be done.
Okay, one more question, and then I have a quick question for you. What is our extinction date if we do nothing?
What is our extinction date if we do nothing?
I won't answer that. But I would be surprised if we do nothing, that we've more than, for the species, several hundred years, for some population of the species, much less, but I don't know.
Okay, and then I just wanted to ask you, Richard, too, just explain to the members what the Turkana Basin is?
Yes,
I'm not sure they're so familiar with it.
many years ago, I set up I did research in Lake Turkana nearly 50 years ago, and we've set up a facility, buildings, labs, classrooms, dormitory, cottages, and we're focusing all the research on the fossils, our ancestors and other creatures, where we find them. So instead of taking them away to Nairobi, 500 miles, we're doing it on site. So we're training some of the local community around there to become technicians. Some of them are now going to college. And it's become the first serious, independently funded private research institution in Kenya. And we're in close collaboration with Stony Brook, and Shirley Kenny, who was president here when I first came here, encouraged me to do this. And we have a founding relationship between TBI and Stony Brook. And one of the reasons I'm here is to continue to discuss future. We're going now into astronomy, we're going into genetics, we're going into a number of new areas that are not fossils, but relate to climate change. I'm also hoping to set up this museum called Garen, N-G-A-R-E-N. There'll be more publicity about it soon, but it's a museum to really put in place an awesome building with all of these thoughts and ideas in it, so people can look at it and go around and visit it again, and not simply look through a window and swipe it clear when you're tired of it. And I watched some young people try and swipe a diorama in Finland of an ice age scene, and they'd just seen enough cold ice, and so they wanted the next picture, please. And we told them, go around the corner, there's another diorama, but don't swipe it. You can't move this piece of glass. But attitudes have changed.
Okay, and then there was one comment in the chat. The minerals we extract from the planet are irreplaceable, so eventually some products we use will not be made in the future.
What's the question?
The
You
mineral,
hear that?
say that again.
The minerals we extract from the planet are irreplaceable, so eventually some products we use will not be made in the future.
The minerals we extract are irreplaceable, so they won't be available in the future.
Well, that may be a very good thing, because maybe we'll figure out what to do with it. Honestly, the way the industrial countries are taking minerals out of Africa and Asia is frightening. And as you say, they're not going back. Recycling, I think, is beginning to catch on. But, you know, there's only one planet, and some of the resources are exhaustible. And on some of the minerals, which we're using for things like telephones and others, it's hopeless. But the economics will control that, I think. It's getting harder and harder to extract them. Yeah, no, that doesn't worry me nearly so much as carbon dioxide.
I think that's all the questions we have, Richard. So I want to thank you so much for doing this. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure. I hope it's been helpful to some of you. All
I
right.
think it is. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Fascinating talk.